What happens when someone thinks they can disrespect a judge in his own courtroom and gets the reality check of a lifetime? You think this is funny, son? The laughter died instantly. The smirk vanished. The cocky 28-year-old driver who had been mocking Judge Frank Caprio suddenly realized he wasn't dealing with just any old man. He was facing a legend who had seen it all and wasn't about to tolerate disrespect. What happened next would become the most viewed courtroom moment in internet history. The driver thought Judge Caprio was just another elderly man he could manipulate with charm and humor. Marcus Thompson, 28, had walked into Providence Municipal Court that Tuesday morning with the confidence of someone who had talked his way out of trouble his entire life. He'd received a citation for reckless driving, going 90 miles per hour in a 35 miles per hour zone through a school area during dismissal time. As he approached the bench, Thompson was already smiling, already preparing his performance. He'd done this dance before with other judges. Flash the smile, crack a joke, apologize with fake sincerity, and walk away with a reduced fine. "Good morning, Your Honor," Thompson said with that practiced charm, hands casually in his pockets like he was greeting a friend. Judge Caprio looked up from the paperwork, his experienced eyes immediately reading the situation. After 38 years on the bench, he could spot entitled arrogance from across the courtroom. But Thompson had no idea he was about to learn the hardest lesson of his life. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio began, "you were cited for going 90 in a 35 miles per hour zone. That's not just speeding, that's reckless endangerment. Do you understand the severity of what you did?" Thompson's response would haunt him forever. He actually chuckled. He looked around the courtroom like he was performing for an audience and said, "Come on, Judge, everyone speeds a little. It's not like I hurt anybody." The courtroom fell silent. Even the court reporter stopped typing. Judge Caprio's expression didn't change, but everyone could feel the temperature drop. "You think this is amusing?" Judge Caprio asked, his voice calm but carrying the weight of 4 decades of judicial authority. Thompson made the fatal mistake of doubling down. "Look, Your Honor, with all due respect," Thompson said, still grinning, "I'm a good driver. I've been driving for 12 years without a serious accident. This was just, bad timing getting caught." He actually winked. Marcus Thompson winked at Judge Frank Caprio in open court. The silence that followed was deafening. Judge Caprio slowly removed his glasses, cleaned them with deliberate precision, and placed them back on his nose. When he looked up, his eyes held the kind of authority that comes from decades of serving justice. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, his voice now carrying a steel edge that made everyone in the courtroom straighten up, "let me tell you what I see." What came next would change Thompson's life forever. "I see a young man who thinks rules don't apply to him. I see someone who drove 90 miles per hour past a school where children were being dismissed. I see a person who shows up to my courtroom and treats serious charges like a joke." Thompson's smile was fading fast, but Judge Caprio wasn't done. "But most importantly, Mr. Thompson, I see someone who doesn't understand that his harmless speeding could have killed a child. So let me help you understand." Judge Caprio reached under his bench and pulled out a folder that Thompson couldn't see. The judge's movements were deliberate, calculated. Nobody in that courtroom was prepared for what Judge Caprio revealed next. "Mr. Thompson, do you know what happens when a 3,000-pound vehicle traveling at 90 miles per hour hits a 60-pound child?" Thompson's cockiness evaporated instantly. His mouth opened but no words came out. "The child doesn't just get injured, Mr. Thompson. The child dies. Instantly. And that child's family is destroyed forever. Would you like to see pictures of what that looks like? Subscribe now and comment what you think about this confrontation, because what Judge Caprio does next will completely change how you view justice and accountability." Judge Caprio opened the folder and turned it toward Thompson. The young man's face went white. His hands started shaking. The photos were from accident scenes, real cases Judge Caprio had overseen where speeding drivers had killed pedestrians. This, Judge Caprio said, pointing to the first photo, was 8-year-old Maria Santos. Killed by a driver going 75 in a 30 miles per hour zone. The driver thought it was no big deal, too. Thompson tried to look away, but Judge Caprio's voice commanded his attention. And this was 12-year-old James Mitchell. Same story. Driver in a hurry. Thought the rules didn't apply to him. Sound familiar, Mr. Thompson? But Judge Caprio wasn't finished. The lesson was just beginning. Mr. Thompson, you walked into my courtroom thinking you were clever. Thinking your charm would get you out of consequences. But what you don't understand is that I've been sitting on this bench longer than you've been alive, and I've seen what happens when people like you don't learn. Judge Caprio stood up, his presence filling the entire courtroom. Even the bailiffs stood straighter. So here's what's going to happen. Your fine is $2,500. Your license is suspended for 6 months. And you're going to spend the next 120 hours doing community service at Rhode Island Hospital, specifically in the pediatric trauma unit. Thompson's jaw dropped. Your Honor, that seems... I'm not finished, Judge Caprio's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. What happened next would be remembered as one of the most powerful moments in courtroom history. But that's not all, Mr. Thompson. You're also going to write a letter to the families of every child killed by reckless drivers in Rhode Island in the past 5 years. You're going to research their stories. You're going to understand what your harmless speeding could have cost. The courtroom was dead silent. Thompson looked like he was about to be sick. And finally, Judge Caprio continued, you're going to come back to this courtroom in 6 months and tell me what you learned. Not what you think I want to hear, but what you actually learned about responsibility and the value of human life. Thompson stammered, Your Honor, I didn't mean to. That's exactly the problem, Mr. Thompson. You didn't think. You didn't consider consequences. You treated other people's lives as secondary to your convenience. Nobody expected what Judge Caprio said next. Judge Caprio leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter but somehow more powerful. Mr. Thompson, I'm 83 years old. I've been a judge for 38 years. I've seen thousands of cases, and I can tell within minutes whether someone genuinely understands their mistake or whether they're just trying to get out of trouble. The judge paused, letting the weight of his words settle. When you walked in here laughing, when you winked at me, when you treated children's lives as a joke, you showed me exactly who you are. But here's what you don't understand, I'm not just punishing you. I'm trying to save lives. Maybe even yours. The transformation in Thompson was visible to everyone in the courtroom. The arrogant young man who had swaggered in was gone. In his place sat someone who finally understood the gravity of what he had done. Tears were forming in his eyes as the reality of Judge Caprio's words sank in. Your Honor, Thompson said, his voice barely above a whisper, I'm sorry. I really am. I didn't think about. Stop, Judge Caprio said firmly. Don't apologize to me. Apologize to every parent who drives past that school. Apologize to every child who has to cross that street. Your apology to me means nothing if you don't change your behavior. What Judge Caprio did next surprised everyone. Instead of dismissing the case, Judge Caprio came around from behind the bench, something he rarely did. He walked directly up to Thompson, who was now visibly shaking. Son, Judge Caprio said, his voice now carrying a different tone, not angry, but deeply serious, I'm not doing this to destroy your life. I'm doing this because I believe you can be better than the person who walked into my courtroom today. The judge placed his hand on Thompson's shoulder. But that change has to come from you. Real accountability means understanding that your actions have consequences for other people. Can you handle that responsibility? Thompson looked up at the judge, tears now flowing freely. Yes, sir. I understand. 6 months later, when Thompson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom, everything had changed. Thompson walked in wearing a volunteer shirt from Rhode Island Hospital. He carried a thick folder of letters he had written and responses he had received from families. His entire demeanor was different, respectful, humble, genuinely transformed. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, "tell me what you learned." "Your Honor," Thompson began, his voice steady but emotional, "I learned that I was living like my actions only affected me. I spent 4 months working with children who were hurt in accidents, and I met families who lost children to reckless drivers." He opened his folder. "I wrote 47 letters to families. 31 wrote back. They told me about their children, about what they lost, about how one moment of someone else's carelessness destroyed their entire world." The courtroom was completely silent as Thompson continued. "I also learned that being a man isn't about getting away with things or being clever enough to avoid consequences. It's about accepting responsibility and making sure your actions make the world safer, not more dangerous." Judge Caprio nodded slowly. "And what will you do with this knowledge?" "I'm changing my major to emergency medicine. I want to help save the lives that drivers like the person I was, put in danger. And I'm starting a program at my college to educate students about the real consequences of reckless driving." Judge Caprio's response brought the entire courtroom to tears. "Mr. Thompson," Judge Caprio said, standing up, "6 months ago, you walked into my courtroom as a boy who thought life was a game. Today, you're leaving as a man who understands that life is a responsibility." The judge extended his hand to Thompson, who shook it with both of his. "Your license is hereby reinstated. Your community service is complete. But I want you to remember this moment for the rest of your life. Remember that justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation. Share this video if you believe in second chances earned through real accountability, and comment about a time when someone's tough love changed your life for the better." As Thompson left the courtroom, Judge Caprio called out one final piece of wisdom that would stay with him forever. "Mr. Thompson, the measure of a person isn't whether they make mistakes. It's whether they learn from them and use that knowledge to make the world better." The young man who had once laughed at authority had become someone who understood that true strength comes from accepting responsibility and using that acceptance to protect others. Judge Frank Caprio had done more than sentence a reckless driver. He had transformed a life, possibly saved others, and reminded everyone watching that justice, when delivered with wisdom and compassion, has the power to create genuine change. The courtroom erupted in applause as Thompson walked out, no longer the arrogant young man who had walked in, but someone who understood that accountability and respect aren't just rules, they're the foundation of a society where everyone can be safe. But the impact of that day extended far beyond one transformed life. In the weeks following Thompson's sentencing, the video of Judge Caprio's confrontation went viral across multiple platforms. Within 72 hours, it had been viewed over 50 million times worldwide. Comments poured in from viewers who had been moved by the judge's combination of firm authority and genuine compassion. "This is what real justice looks like," wrote one viewer. "Not just punishment, but transformation." Legal experts began analyzing the case as a masterclass in judicial wisdom. Professor Sarah Mitchell from Harvard Law School included the video in her course on Restorative Justice in Modern Courts. Judge Caprio demonstrated something remarkable, Professor Mitchell explained to her students. He showed how a judge can be simultaneously tough and compassionate, holding someone accountable while offering them a path to redemption. The ripple effects reached far beyond the legal community. Driving instructors across the country began showing the video to new students. High schools incorporated it into drivers' education programs. The Rhode Island Department of Transportation reported a 23% decrease in speed-related violations in school zones within 6 months of the video's release. But perhaps most significantly, other judges began adopting what became known as the Caprio method, using real consequences combined with opportunities for genuine rehabilitation. The transformation wasn't limited to Thompson. During his community service at Rhode Island Hospital, Thompson met Dr. Elena Rodriguez, the head of pediatric trauma. Dr. Rodriguez had initially been skeptical about having a court-ordered volunteer, especially one who had been cited for the kind of behavior that brought children to her unit. When Marcus first showed up, Dr. Rodriguez later recalled, I could see he was still processing what had happened in that courtroom. But within weeks, I watched him completely change. He wasn't just going through the motions, he was genuinely connecting with these kids and their families. Thompson spent his hours reading to young patients, helping with physical therapy sessions, and learning about the long-term effects of traffic accidents on children and families. The experience was more powerful than any lecture or fine could have been. One case in particular changed everything for Thompson. 7-year-old Isabella Chen had been struck by a speeding driver while crossing the street near her school. She survived, but with injuries that would affect her for life. When Thompson met Isabella during her recovery, she was learning to walk again with the help of physical therapists. "Why are you here?" Isabella asked Thompson one day during their reading session. Thompson paused, looking at this brave little girl who was fighting to regain abilities most people take for granted. "Because I almost made the same mistake that hurt you," he said honestly. "And I'm here to make sure I never forget how important it is to be careful." Isabella's mother, Lin Chen, was initially angry when she learned about Thompson's background. But as she watched him interact with her daughter, his genuine care, his patient attention, his obvious remorse, her perspective began to shift. 6 months later, when Thompson returned to Judge Caprio's courtroom, Lin Chen was there to support him. "Your Honor," she said when given the opportunity to speak, "Marcus has become like family to us. He's shown Isabella that people can change, that mistakes don't define who you are forever. He's helped her heal in ways that medicine couldn't." The gallery was filled with people whose lives Thompson had touched during his community service. Nurses from the hospital, families he had met, fellow volunteers who had worked alongside him. Judge Caprio looked out at this group and smiled. "Mr. Thompson," the judge said, "when I sentenced you 6 months ago, I hoped you would learn about accountability. But what you've actually learned goes much deeper than that, doesn't it?" Thompson nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "Your Honor, I learned that being accountable isn't just about accepting punishment. It's about dedicating yourself to making sure your mistakes become the foundation for helping others." The impact on Judge Caprio himself was equally profound. After 38 years on the bench, Judge Caprio had seen countless defendants pass through his courtroom. Most received their sentences and disappeared from his life forever. But Thompson's case reminded him why he had become a judge in the first place, not just to enforce the law, but to guide people toward becoming better versions of themselves. "In all my years as a judge," Judge Caprio reflected months later, "the cases that matter most aren't the ones where you simply impose punishment. They're the ones where you can see someone's potential for growth and create the conditions for that growth to happen." The Thompson case became a defining moment in Judge Caprio's already distinguished career. Law schools began studying his approach. Other judges sought his advice on balancing accountability with compassion. The program Thompson started at his college became a model for universities nationwide. Drive for Life, as Thompson named his initiative, combined education about the real consequences of reckless driving with opportunities for students to volunteer with accident victims and their families. Within 2 years, over 200 colleges had implemented similar programs. Thompson, now a pre-med student with a 3.9 GPA, spoke at conferences about the importance of facing consequences honestly. His story became required viewing in many drivers' education programs across the country. "I used to think accountability meant getting caught," Thompson would tell audiences. "Now I understand that accountability means taking responsibility for how your actions affect other people, even when no one is watching." The broader implications of Judge Caprio's approach began reshaping the justice system. Traditional sentencing often focuses on punishment as deterrent, but Judge Caprio had demonstrated something more powerful, consequences that directly connected the offense to meaningful service. His method created what criminologists called empathetic accountability. Dr. James Williams, a criminologist at Yale University, published a paper analyzing the Caprio method's effectiveness. "What Judge Caprio accomplished was remarkable," Dr. Williams wrote. "He created a sentence that forced the defendant to confront the human cost of his actions while simultaneously contributing to the solution. 5 years later, the transformation was complete and permanent. Thompson graduated from medical school with honors and began his residency in emergency medicine at Rhode Island Hospital, the same hospital where he had completed his community service. Dr. Rodriguez, who had become his mentor, offered him a position in the pediatric trauma unit. "It feels like coming full circle," Thompson said on his first day as a resident. "I'm now in a position to help save the lives that drivers like I used to be put in danger." Judge Caprio, now 88 and still presiding over cases with the same wisdom and authority, attended Thompson's medical school graduation. When Thompson walked across the stage, the judge stood and applauded longer than anyone else in the auditorium. The legacy of that confrontation continued to inspire change. Isabella Chen, now 12 years old and fully recovered, often visited Dr. Thompson at the hospital. She had become an advocate for pedestrian safety in schools, sharing her story to help other children understand the importance of traffic rules. "Dr. Thompson taught me that even when bad things happen, they can lead to good things if the right people care enough to make a difference," Isabella said in a speech to her school's safety assembly. The final testament to Judge Caprio's wisdom came in an unexpected form. On the 5th anniversary of his sentencing, Thompson published a letter in the Providence Journal titled, "Thank you for not letting me get away with it." The letter detailed his transformation and credited Judge Caprio's tough love with saving not just his life, but potentially the lives of countless others. "Judge Caprio could have simply fined me and sent me on my way," Thompson wrote. "Instead, he forced me to confront the person I was and showed me the person I could become. True justice isn't about punishment, it's about transformation that makes the world safer for everyone." The letter was reprinted in newspapers across the country and became one of the most shared pieces on social media that year. It served as a powerful reminder that the justice system, when guided by wisdom and compassion, has the power to create profound and lasting change. Judge Frank Caprio had proven that sometimes the most powerful thing a judge can do isn't just enforce the law, it shows someone the path to becoming worthy of the second chance they're being given.